nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vinashujitam Purna Prema Rasutsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payorasho Murake Dato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdnani Patyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pango Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Param Bhojo Radha Madana Mohano Kuladi Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhaktamaj Jai Rachilo Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lilash Tahate Shunite Galai Shila Tahate Nahuilu Murachita Jeba Nahi Puji Keba Shunite Seha Kiad Bhuta Caitanya-carit Krishna upajibe priti janibera serariti shunile borohoihit Shriyatam nityam giyatam mura Chintyatam bhaktash Caitanya-caritamrta So, by the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, a graceful swan in the inexhaustible reservoir of Chaitanya Lila, where from the very essence of Krishna Lila streams in the 10 directions. Again today we'll hear Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. And in particular, we're here in the Moti Lila, the Sanatan Shiksha, the discussion of the Abhideya Tattva, and in particular, we're discussing a set of verses which speak about the importance of Mahatsanga, or Sadhusanga. So we've heard a couple of payars and a couple of well-known statements on this topic, and we have one remaining payar and verse from the Bhagavatam as evidence of it, to stress the importance of sadhusanga. So we'll hear that today. And then we'll come to discussion of the topic of Shraddha, how Shraddha is defined, how it becomes firm, how it is acquired, and so forth. So I've shared the file in the box. I'm starting from payar 54. And we should be ready to go. So again, in the last class we heard this statement of Jad Bharat as well as the statement of Prahlad, stressing the necessity of bathing in the foot dust of Mahatmas. So now to conclude that discussion, then this emphatic statement, if you will, is made to stress the conclusion. So it says, Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastri Koi, Lavamatra Sadhu Sanghe, Sarva Siddhi Hoi. All the Shastras say, Sadhu Sangha. All attainments, or siddhis, can come about as a result of just a moment of Sadhu Sangha. So the import of the statement, all the Shastras say sadhu sangha, is that all the Shastras lay stress on the indispensable importance of sadhu sangha. And in the tippani it's stated, just a moment of sadhu sangha means a very brief period of sadhu sangha. So as we discussed earlier, Jiva Gosvami explained sadhu sangha or mahat sangha to refer to the mahat sangskaradi vishesh. Or rather he defined fortune as the sanskar produced by mahat sangha. So if we read this statement in that context, a moment of sadhu sangha may be enough to create the sanskar within the mind whereby one acquires shraddha in the path of Uttama Bhakti. And by that shraddha, one can then progress and ultimately receive this self-manifestation of prema within the heart, or achieve the prayojana, the parama purushartha. So, although education and a lot of sadhu sangha is typically necessary for most or all, there's, you could say, a tipping point or a cornerstone of some moment where that the momentum in one's life begins to flow principally towards this spiritual object or this spiritual path. And so that turning point or that tipping point may come about from just one moment of association with a great sadhu. And there are so many instances in the Puranas and in the, stories about the lives of great Mahatmas and, recollections of various Vaishnavas of the present day, how sometimes it was just one particular moment or one particular experience that lodged in them or made what they call a mark, so to speak, in one's mind, such that one gave sufficient attention or gave importance to things whereby they went further on the path, whereby they ultimately came to adopt the path, and so on and so forth. So we don't want, this statement need not be interpreted to mean, okay, just a moment of sadhu sangha is all I need, and now I'll go off and do whatever I like and interpret that however I think fit. That won't be the import. Rather, in most cases, prolonged sadhu sangha is highly necessary. And as we'll see in the commentary, that's the import of what this point is referring to. But nevertheless, according to the caliber of the sadhu with whom one associates, it can happen that just one moment is sufficient to lodge the sanskar, or make the mark such that the direction of one's life is changed. So, to evidence this statement, we have a verse from the Bhagavatam, which occurs identically twice in the Bhagavatam. Once as spoken by the sages at Naimisharanya to Sutta Goswami, and once as spoken by the Prachetas to Bhagavan in the 4th canto. So we'll look at the commentaries on both occurrences of the verse in our discussion. So the verse is as follows. Tuliyama lavenapi na svargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kimuta shisha. We cannot equate svarga, or non-repetition of birth, much less benedictions had by human beings, with even an instant of association with those who are attached to Bhagavan. So, a strong statement. Typically, sadhu sangha is thought to be a means or a preliminary stage in the spiritual path. By associating with sadhus, one learns the path, one follows the path, one achieves the goal, which is conventionally understood often to mean moksha. So here, the statement is made that svarga, or in other words, the outcome on the path of karma, and moksha, the outcome on the path of gyan, or any other thing that can be had in this world, is not sufficient to be considered equivalent to the thing that's preliminary to the path to attain those things. It could appear like a strange statement if one isn't acquainted with the path of bhakti and the idea that it's by the association of bhaktas that one can attain a purushartha that's superior even to the kama found in svarga and moksha and other varieties of attainments. So this will all be elucidated here in the commentary. Sri Samipad explains that the Prachetas speak this verse to Sri Bhagavan to indicate that they pray for the association of bhaktas of Sri Bhagavan, even in lieu of attaining rulership over a kingdom on the earth, entrance into Svarga and Moksha. Sri Sanatanpad adds, in this way, association with the Sats being the supreme attainment, on account of its being superior to the attainments of Svarga and even liberation, is established. Sri Jivapad also explains that this verse demonstrates that association with the Mahat is verily supremely nirgun, that is, it is beyond the three gunas of Prakriti, more so than anything else, because of such associations being superior even to the nirguna state of moksha. So wow, someone here on earth in the world in their embodied state associating with an Uttam Bhagavat, this is considered something more nirgun than even the state of moksha. So, what is, nirgunatva is, essentially to be enveloped in or to be under the influence of Bhagavan's Sarup Shakti. But that Sarup Shakti has what they call Vaichitri, or it has variegatedness in terms of the variety of Sat, the variety of Chit, the variety of Ananda that it manifests, and it is in the plane of Vaikuntha, the plane of Goloka, the Leela of Krishna, that Vaichitri or variegatedness becomes most wonderfully expressed or expressed to the greatest degree. And that Leela is characterized by prema more so than anything else. So it's in Prem Bhakti that the ultimate variegatedness or Vaichitri of Bhagavan's Chit Shakti is experienced. So if something of that prema can be conveyed, can be discussed, can be experienced by hearing about it from a sadhu, by hearing a sadhu's praising of it or chanting of it or seeing some of the expressions that it, or symptoms that it produces in the sadhu's behavior, speech, etc., then that is indeed more nirgun, or nirgun to a more profound extent than even someone who's experiencing Brahmananda, or this nirvishesh or non-variegated manifestation of the Parashakti or Bhagavan's Sarup Shakti. So this would be what Jiva Gosvami is alluding to here. So because that attainment of that ultimate Prem Leela of Radha and Krishna is so extraordinary, then achieving even the most initial introduction or reaching the gateway to the attainment of that is considered superior to even reaching the ultimate height of what can be achieved on another path, or reaching even another spiritual path that never leads one beyond or up to that most exalted attainment. So in that sense, Sadhu Sangha is here being said to be the supreme attainment, not because it's the end in and of itself, but because it's the means to the ultimate spiritual attainment, and thus that means to that supreme spiritual attainment is superior even to the actual attainment of other ends of the path of karma, the path of Gyan. So this is the import of these comments. Sri Chakravarti Pad elaborates on this point in his portrayal of the Pracheta's statement to Sri Bhagavan as follows. Quote, all the conventionally desirable benedictions that are all the conventionally desirable benedictions there are, certainly are experienced within attainment of the benedictions of Svarga and Moksha. Whereas, association with sadhus' thousand-fold superiority to Svarga and Moksha is understood when association with sadhus occurs. Relishing of the sweetness of discussion of your form and qualities shall occur, and that is crores and crores of times greater than the pleasure of Svarga and even the pleasure of your undifferentiated essential nature, that is, Brahman, which is experienced as a result of moksha. So, by saying that all desirable benedictions are experienced within svarga and moksha, he wants to say that we don't need to mention things of the world or all the other things that could be achieved, varieties of yogic siddhi or, various states of being a great king or a great artist or a great scholar or a great this or a great that by speaking of svarga and moksha, you're, as, a placeholder, you're alluding to all of that. And so, having referred to all of that collectively, when it is said that association with the sadhu is 1,000 times superior to that, it means it's 1,000 times superior to anything else. And why is that? Because in that association of sadhus, there's discussion of Krishna, of Krishna's madhurya, which is the supreme aesthetic experience. And Caitanya-caritamrta nityam tusyanti cha ramanti cha. The sadhus are always rejoicing and engaged in discussion of that. So in that association, one will hear such discussion, one will feel such satisfaction and delight, and that is crores and crores of times greater than the pleasure of svarga, the pleasure of even moksha. So now he goes even further in saying, and this association is not only relishable just to jivas. As per your statement in Padma Puran, quote, I dwell neither in Vaikuntha nor in the hearts of yogis. Where my bhaktas sing, there I remain, O Narad. It, that is, the association of sadhus, your bhaktas, is a cause of paramount pleasure even for you, who are the giver of pleasure to all. That is, even for you who are the giver of all types of pleasure. So not only do jivas find this sadhu sangha the best, even Bhagavan finds this sadhu sangha the most desirable thing, the most pleasurable thing. Therefore, association with sadhus alone is chosen by us as a benediction to be prayed for. So, very nice. Thank you, Visvanatha Cakravarti. But he's not done yet. This is his comment on this verse. As I said, this verse comes twice in the Bhagavatam, so this is his comment on one instance of it, but he has more to say in his comment on the other instance of it in the Bhagavatam. So we'll look at that as well. I promise it's worth your time. Quote, we cannot equate svarga, a result of karma, or non-repetition of birth, that is moksha, a result of jnana, with a moment that is a very short time of association with they who are attached to Bhagavan, that is, his bhaktas. So it said, Bhagavat Sangi Sangasya. So the word sangha has two principal meanings. One is association or companionship, to be together, and the other is attachment. So the commentators interpret Bhagavat Sangi here as not simply someone who's with Bhagavan, but rather someone who's attached to Bhagavan in the sense of devoted to Bhagavan. So that's why it's rendered like this. So he goes here with some kaimutyanai. Much less need it be said, we cannot equate even a moment of that association with the insignificant benedictions had by human beings, such as that of a kingdom. In other words, if sadhu sangha is better than svarga and moksha, then that already implies that it's better than anything you can have on the earth. Since the sprout of extremely rare to attain bhakti appears as a result of association with sadhus. So, the maximum degree of what is achievable on the path of jnana or karma is incomparable to the most minute beginning of what is achievable on the path of bhakti. This is the point he wants to draw out here. So this is the purport. In this regard, we cannot equate even the complete result of karma, jnana, and so on with even a moment of association with sadhus, that is, that which occurs within even the sadhana of bhakti. So, how relishable will sadhu sangha be? That also depends upon the adhikar, or depends upon the depth of the bhakti of the individual. But he's addressing that and saying that even a moment of association or the association with sadhus that occurs even within the sadhana of bhakti, much less with such association with sadhus spanning a long time, even further less with the bhakti that is the manifest result of that association, and least of all with prema, which is the result of such sadhana bhakti. So it doesn't just mean that, okay, the experience that prema bhaktas have in the association of each other, that's superior to moksha, but not anything less than that. He's saying, no, you don't even have to say that. Even the association that occurs as an act of bhakti for those following the path of sadhana bhakti, even that's superior to svarga and moksha. And you don't even have to say that. Even the person who's not even following the path of sadhana yet, but just learning about it from a sadhu and taking their association, even that's superior to svarga and moksha. And not even that, the person who just for a minute came and heard a little bit about it, just an initial exposure, even that is superior to the ultimate results of these other things. So this is what he wants to draw out. So in this way also, superiority in a gradation is indicated by a fortiori reasoning, or what is called kaimutya nyaya. Here also in this regard, as per the lot, or the imperative mood in the verb tulayama, indicative of possibility, we do not consider even the possibility of equation of sadhusanga with svarga, moksha, or anything of the earth. So the lot lakar can convey different meanings. It can convey an injunctive sense. It can also convey here what is called sambhavana, or various other things. So he's saying that in this case, we'll take it as sambhavana. So if it were taken as if we think of what it would mean if it were taken in the most common sense, which is the injunctive sense, then we can understand why he doesn't want to read it that way. In other words, if it were in the injunctive sense, it's like saying, you shouldn't think this is that way. Don't think like that. So it's not merely that they're giving a teaching, but rather he's saying that they're speaking about the scope of possibility. In other words, they're speaking about an ontological reality, not simply giving an instruction. So they're saying it's not even possible for these things to be equated. So if you understand that, you don't even have to be ordered to not think that way. Rather, we're just illuminating for you what something is so that you can come to that conclusion for yourself. So by clarifying that it's the non-injunctive sense, he gives it a bigger sweep, if you will, of meaning. In this way, it is indicated, quote, certainly no one compares a mustard seed with Mount Meru. So, a very nice illustration, which is interesting in that, just as you don't compare something tiny to something huge, he's speaking of a moment of association of being mountain-like in comparison to what would otherwise be thought of grand or the full attainment of something on another path. Anyway, perhaps there's an intended ornament of contradiction in the choice of the analogy. By the usage of the plural, this meaning being unable to be disproven by anyone because of the approval of many of it is suggested. So the verb tulayama is a first person plural verb. It's spoken by the prachetas as a group. But he's saying it's not just that they speak in the plural here because they're a group that's speaking. Rather, they speak in the plural to indicate that it's not just us who think that. Many people think this way. There are so many, enlightened persons who also perceive things in this way. So they imply that this is the way many people think, and therefore it, isn't something that should be discredited or thought to be not factual. So then he goes on, by this mention of, quote, the association of those who are attached to Bhagavan, it is conveyed that as the association of those who are attached to women is even more highly censurable than association with women, as per the statement in the Bhagavad 3:31-35, quote, A man's infatuation and bondage do not occur as a result of association the way they do as a result of association with women and association with those who are attached to them. So exactly, those who are attached to Bhagavan, association with those who are attached to Bhagavan is more venerable, more praiseworthy, and more desirable than even association with Bhagavan. So this is an interesting remark, and, just for in the modern context, we'll just add that, this mention of women here is what's called an upalakshana, so it's not, meant to bag on women, but simply that the association of whatever gender or whatever figure or whatever may be the, distracting, of a distracting influence to someone or evoke, considerations of sexual thoughts and all these things, that he's saying that more so than even that object, the association of people that foster affinity for that object, that talk about that object, that conjure up further interest in that object, that's more effective in drawing the mind into thought of that object than even the object itself. Just as, someone may not have any particular interest at this moment in eating a particular dessert. Let's say, someone wants rasgullas or ice cream or whatever your cultural equivalent is, So, but if you talk to someone who starts talking all about, whatever gelato they had in Italy, and you just have to have Italian gelato, and, there's this new Italian gelato shop down the street, and, starts talking all about it, then soon enough they've talked you into going and having gelato. If you just saw an advertisement for gelato, you wouldn't have gone. But the fact that you were with this person who talked it up, that made you go and have it. So something like that, the verse is saying that those who are attached to women, or those who actively think about and foster and exacerbate their preoccupation with, sexual thought and activity, that's more likely to induce oneself to also act that way than even seeing, persons who may elicit such desires in the mind. So, as the bondage in this way is, there's another statement in the same prakaran in the Bhagavatam, which says, just as asat sangha has the most greatest effect in conditioning someone or furthering one's condition towards engaging with those objects of the senses, similarly, there's nothing more beneficial for someone pursuing a spiritual object than the association of sadhus who are always talking about, always culturing, always praising that ultimate spiritual object. So here, he's going on to say, or he's adding a twist, if you will, to this point that's made in the Bhagavatam by saying that that the association of sadhus who have prema for Bhagavan is even more valuable than the association of Bhagavan himself. In other words, you can go to the temple, you can have darshan of the Vigraha, that will be beneficial for you. But to hear about, the prema of Radha and Krishna from the mouth of a melted-hearted bhakta, that will evoke far more regard, that will evoke far more absorption of the mind in the deity than even seeing the deity in most cases, or in general cases. So he's saying that the association of those attached to Bhagavan is more venerable, more praiseworthy, and more desirable than association with Bhagavan himself. So if, we come back to the root verse, if he's saying, we can't equate the association of sadhus with even svarga or moksha, what to speak of anything of the earth, then he's adding a step and saying, and we won't even equate the association of sadhus with the association of Bhagavan. The association of sadhus is even more desirable than the association of Bhagavan himself. And this will be, but that statement we can add will be specific to that of a sadhaka, in the stage of acquiring these things. For Siddha Bhaktas, the case may be otherwise, but that's, I think, easily understood. All right, so this is how Chakravarti Pad reads these statements, and we have a little bit more on them. There's another statement in the Bhagavatam which is almost identical to this one. It just slightly it's spoken in first person by Shiva to the Prachetas earlier on in the Bhagavad. So there's a couple of interesting comments on that verse as well. So in case we're not thorough enough, we'll look at the commentaries on that as well. So the verse is as follows: I equate neither svarga nor non-repetition of birth, much less the benedictions had by human beings, with even half a moment of association with those who are attached to Bhagavan. Sri Jivapad comments in regard to this verse that not only does Priti for Bhagavan belittle all Purusharthas, but even the cause of attaining Priti for Bhagavan, namely the association of great bhaktas of Bhagavan, belittles moksha. So this, Jiva Gosvami puts it, quite plainly, the point that's been implied throughout thus far, which is generally considered the foremost among the four conventional Purusharthas. Following Swami Pad, Sri Sanatana Pad, similarly, we need a Y, comments in regard to this verse. Therefore, association with bhaktas of Bhagavan verily dances continuously atop the heads of all four of the conventional Purusharthas. So Swamipad himself says that, but Sanatan adds slightly to it, so I put Sanatan's actual text there. But especially coming from the mouth of Sridhar Swami, this is quite an interesting remark, that sometimes, from the presentation of the Caitanya-caritamrta, sometimes there's a perception that, this idea of Prem being the Pancham Purushartha is a unique viewpoint of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, but although maybe the crystallization of that and the direct teaching of that can be attributed in that way, that there's implication of that in the Bhagavad itself, and that not only that, but even the means to that is described as superior to all other Purusharthas. Here you have evidence of it from the words of Sridhar Swami Pad himself. So, again, maybe I'll just add that I like sometimes to, as we go through these things, to show how many things the Gaudiya Sampradaya is indebted to Sridhar Swami for. I find that a happy subject. Anyway, Chakravarti Pad lastly also comments, indeed, one should only desire association with the Sat and not any of the other conventional Purusharthas. In other words, and what is all this discussion meant to imply? That one should focus on this, or this is the thing that one should seek in one's life. So I'm adding in here then, if someone says, okay, I desire sadhu sangha, then I pray for this. How can one pray for such sangha? There's a beautiful prayer of Yamunacharya in his Stotra Ratna to this effect. He says, quote, bring me into the sight of those Mahatmas who out of longing to once behold your figure consider unparalleled enjoyment and mukti to be straw. Those great souls whose separation is extremely difficult to bear for a moment, even for you. In other words, I want the association of those bhaktas that Bhagavan can't bear to give up. As we heard earlier, he tells Narada, I go wherever my bhaktas are singing. I'm not in the yogi's heart, I'm not just sitting in Vaikuntha. So those bhaktas that Bhagavan can't bear to be away from, those bhaktas that Bhagavan wants to be with all the time, Bhagavan, let me be there too. Let me also have their company and be in the midst of they who have such longing for you and who consider any other interest to be trifling. In other words, those who are akantis, or fully one-pointed upon you. So that concludes this prakaran on sadhu sangha. So earlier in the chapter we had this discussion establishing bhakti and Krishna bhakti specifically as the abhideya, or the principal directive of the Shastra. And then the question came up, okay, well, how do we get that bhakti? How do we take up that path of bhakti? So the answer was given from sadhu sangha. You need the association of a bhakta, and from the bhakta you can find the path of bhakti. So now we've heard a number of verses and explanations that stress the importance of mahat sangha, or sadhu sangha, bhakta sangha, whatever you want to call it. So now it goes into the unfolding of that process, or now we enter a new prakaran in the chapter, where, okay, how is it that in that association one acquires shraddha? So there's this path, there's this abhideya, bhakti, there are these bhaktas that are following this path. Someone is now in their association. So what is the shraddha, or what is the sanskar which gives rise to a particular variety of conviction that arises as an effect of that association? In other words, many may have a general understanding that it's valuable to associate with sadhus, but sometimes, ironically, people associate with sadhus, but they don't actually acquire shraddha in what the sadhus follow. They come to sadhus and give some offerings and, show some respect, and then try to get blessings for whatever worldly things they're busy with. And then, even though they're in the midst of sadhus who could lead them on this higher spiritual path, they neglect to pursue any of that because they don't take the time to actually listen to hear that there is even such a path. And then they seek the blessings of those sadhus for their, so that their, wife can give birth because she's having trouble conceiving, or whatever other thing people come, to sadhus for, good grades for the kids on tests, and, granting visas to go to foreign countries, and all these kind of things. So to associate with the sadhu, to hear from the sadhu, then what sanskar should be formed, what conviction should arise, what is it that the sadhus actually teach, and what is the conclusion or the appropriate conviction that one should acquire as a result of that association. That is where the flow of the conversation goes next. So, having thus explained in the last 7 verses how shraddha and ultimately bhakti, prema, and transcendence of samsara are attained as a result of sadhu sangha, Srimad Mahaprabhu next explains in the following 8 verses the specific nature of the shraddha that makes one eligible for the path of bhakti. So in the tippani, we find the following introduction. Only a person possessed of shraddha in the precept of a bhakta of Bhagavan is a bearer of eligibility, or an adhikari, for Krishna bhakti. To state this, he first describes that precept, that is, the fundamental precept which a bhakta of Bhagavan lives by and teaches, with 2 payars. This and the following. So, he says, Krishna kripalu arjunere laksha koriya jagatere rakiyachena upadeshadiya. Gracious Krishna, aiming at Arjuna, has protected the world with his instructions. So this payar is stated to introduce the ultimate advice given by Sri Krishna at the conclusion of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. The intended sense of the phrase, quote, aiming at Arjuna, can be understood from a comment of Sri Sanatana Pad in regard to verse 1866, the verse that follows the 2 that are cited next to convey Bhagavan Sri Krishna's ultimate advice in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So this is in where he cites the verse Sarva Dharman Prityaja in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. There he comments as follows. This instruction, furthermore, is stated in regard to Arjuna for the sake of teaching other persons. Such instruction, rather, is not for him, because of his naturally being a topmost Bhagavata, and thus not requiring any such instructions, and on account of his being an avatar of Nara, a great friend of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and so forth. So, if from the perspective that Arjuna is also an eternal companion or associate of Bhagavan, that he's also considered an avatar of the sage Nara, then we can say it's not that really he needs to be taught here, but that this is a lila, and in the context of the lila, he's acting as one who needs to be taught, so that this teaching can be given to others. So that's in the payar itself, where it says, quote, aiming at Arjuna. Why does he say aiming? Why doesn't he just say speaking to Arjuna? So he says aiming at Arjuna for the purpose of, it could also be reinterpreted as making Arjuna the object of the instruction. He's giving the instruction, but the instruction is actually for people in the world, not Arjuna specifically. So this is what the payar is trying to convey. So now we come to what was that ultimate instruction that he gave. So this is considered to be the ultimate final teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is an important subject, or if this is, the Gita is a text of such importance, then what is, the ultimate final prescription in gist that's given in the text, that's a worthy matter of consideration. So it's cited here, and we'll look at a number of the commentaries on that statement from Swami Pad, Chakravarti Pad, Vidyabhushan Pad, and a bit from Jiva Gosvami as well. So these well-known verses are as follows. Sarvaguyattamam bhuya shrinu me paramam vacha ishtosi me dridam iti tato vakshami te hitam manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mam me vaishyasi satyam te pratijani priyosi me. Again hear my supreme advice, most confidential of all. You are exceedingly dear to me, thus I will speak of the highest good for you. Be of mind fixed upon me, my bhakta, my worshipper. Offer obeisance to me. You will come to me alone. Truly, I promise you this, for you are dear to me. So, first, we'll just look at the commentaries when he says this is, quote, sarva guya tama. So, this is beyond a superlative, or when there's something comparative, you get the tara suffix. When there's something superlative, you get the tama suffix. And when you have sarva something tama, then it's superlative comparative to, anything and everything. So, to understand that this is most confidential of all, then what were the things that were less confidential or somewhat confidential? That's also valuable to know in order to see why this is most confidential. So, Sri Jiva Pad explains in Krishna Sandarbha, in regard to Bhagavad Gita 18:61-66, that Sri Krishna refers to knowledge of Brahman as being confidential, guya. Knowledge of Paramatma as being more confidential, guya tara. Knowledge of Bhagavan in general as being most confidential, guya tama. And knowledge specifically of himself, Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna, as being the most confidential of all, sarva guya tama. Sri Jiva Pad further explains that the cause of Sri Krishna's ultimately disclosing this most confidential of all knowledges to Arjuna is a profusion of paramount grace. In Bhakti Sandarbha 332, Sri Jiva Pad also refers to worship of Sri Krishna in the form of having one's mind fixed upon him, and so forth, as is described in verse 1865, and in the form of having him alone as one's shelter, as is described in 1866, as the most confidential of all knowledges. So in other words, he gives two interpretations. In one sense, the most confidential knowledge is the knowledge of Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna in comparison to Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan as understood to have many different self-manifestations. In another sense, this most confidential knowledge is this knowledge of Sharanagati and Uttama Bhakti or Ekantik Bhakti to that Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Sri Chakravarti Pad alternately explains in his commentary on Bhagavad Gita that knowledge leading to moksha is confidential, knowledge leading to the attainment of Sri Bhagavan, that is, knowledge that is of the essential nature of bhakti, is more confidential, and knowledge the characteristic of which is pure bhakti alone is most confidential. Combining the views given by these two commentators, Sri Krishna's supreme advice, which is, quote, most confidential of all, can be understood to refer to knowledge of Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna and pure bhakti to him specifically. Pure bhakti as taught by Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself at the conclusion of Sri Gita is also discussed in the Bhagavad in the 6th canto, verses 29, chapter 3, 29-22. And Sri Chakravarti Pad specifies in his commentary on these verses that this section of the text speaks specifically about the Abhiteya Tattva of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, why are we bringing this point in the Bhagavatam here? Because in this place in the Bhagavatam, as per the commentary, the Abhiteya Tattva is being described, which is the whole subject of this chapter. So the same chapter is, the same subject matter is there, and the exact same word is there. This guya, or this idea of confidentiality, is also being attributed to this Abhideya Tattva. So Bhagavatam, Gita, Charitamrita, all three lining up saying that here's the Abhideya Tattva, it's Krishna Bhakti, and it's guya, or confidential. So it's confidential, so far we've said, in comparison to other forms of bhakti, and in comparison to other conceptions of the Paratattva. Okay, but here in this commentary on the Bhagavat, we get another sense of confidentiality. So to complement that, we're also adding that to the discussion. Thus, Sri Jivapad's explanation in his Krama Sandarbha Tika of bhakti's confidentiality is also relevant to understanding the confidentiality spoken of in the verses under discussion. Sri Jivapad, in his commentary there, explains two reasons for bhakti's confidentiality. It is to be kept secret for the sake of maintaining respect for it in society, and common persons of impure mind are unable to understand it. If a gift of great value and subtlety is given to persons who lack the capacity to appreciate its value, it is highly likely that the gift will not be treated with the respect that it deserves, and that it will be squandered or defiled. Thus, such a gift ought not be given to persons who lack the qualification to honor it appropriately. Oops, we need an it there. Thus, in Bhagavad Gita 1867, the following verse, Bhagavan Sri Krishna prohibits that the teaching given in the verses under discussion be given to those who are unfit to receive it. Quote, neither to someone who is neglectful of austerity, nor to a non-bhakta, nor to someone who does not wish to listen, nor to someone who casts aspersions on me, is this ever to be spoken. So there's a saying in the Bible, not to cast pearls before swine, or in other words, not to give out something valuable to people who can't appreciate it, because it doesn't benefit them, and it's also disrespectful to the gift. And if you got the gift from somebody, it's also disrespectful to the person that gave it to you. So to maintain the dignity of the giver, to maintain the dignity of the gift, and to see to the best interest of the potential recipient, there has to be discretion about to whom and to what extent any of this subject matter is discussed. So this is one point. And the second point is Jiva Goswami's point that persons of impure mind can't understand it anyway. This is important. In other words, why is Chitta Shuddhi essential? Because without a certain degree of purification of the psyche, people won't understand any of this. And trying to explain things to people who don't have the purity of mind to understand them or to apply them doesn't actually help them, and it inevitably leads to misunderstanding of the subject matter, which can then create, viral misunderstanding in society, so to speak, and ultimately it increases the likelihood of people committing aparad. So to not be the one who sets that avalanche afall, discretion is to be sustained. Anyway, this is all relevant to the point in the verse of confidentiality. So now we'll look at the commentaries on the verse itself. Samipad's commentary is as follows. First, those who are unable to contemplate in full this exceedingly profound Gita Shastra, he graciously, personally collects and states its essence with 3 verses, Sarva Guya Tamam. So in 1863, right, he says, Yatechchasi tatha kuru. Think about everything I've told you, deliberate on it, and then as you wish, do that. So he's not ultimately ordering Arjuna. He's saying, you use your own vivek, or your own discrimination, which I've guided you about how to use, and using that, arrive at your own conclusion. So anyone who truly has conviction in what they want to convey to someone else, they don't command the person to do it, or simply try to persuade the person to do it, but they present the value of what they put forth, such that they're confident that the other person, using their own impartial analysis, will also come to recognize it to be meritorious enough to be adopted. So this is how Bhagavan himself presents all of these principles in the Gita. And similarly is how a guru or a representative of Bhagavan, a representative of the path of bhakti is meant to teach. In other words, it's not that you have to force people or convert people into following this. Rather, if you simply show the beauty of this thing, people will appreciate it and wish to follow it of their own accord. And so the role of the guru is not to just simply tell people what to think, but to teach people how to think and give them a clear access to the Shastra such that they have the suitable materials for contemplation, such that they can do their own thinking and arrive at the conclusion of its own accord. And this point is further highlighted a little later in Samipad's commentary. That's why I'm bringing it up. Anyhow, after he says, you reflect and you do as you wish to do, then Arjuna is sitting there starting to think, or he's reflecting on everything he heard, and then, Krishna thinks, well, it's also not so easy to fully understand all these things. It's also not so easy to contemplate everything that I've explained. So, for those who are unable to contemplate this in full, or to necessarily understand and analyze everything, I'll also break it down and summarize the gist that you might also arrive at. So, this is not overstepping the role, but this is assisting in the role out of love and kindness. So he's not overstepping Arjuna's autonomy, so to speak, but he's handing it to him and then offering a helping hand as well. So, although my most confidential advice in comparison even to all of it, that is confidential, has been stated by me here and there throughout our conversation, that is, throughout this Gita Shastra, hear it being spoken by me again. So, I'll give you a clue. Of everything I said, the gist of it was this. Remember this bit? So he repeats. He states the reason for speaking this supreme advice again and again. Quote, considering that you are exceedingly dear to me. In other words, because he holds Arjuna so dear, he wants the best for Arjuna. He wants Arjuna to get the main thing. So therefore, he's helping him attentively by repeating the essential point. Thus, tata, meaning for this reason, I will speak of the highest good for you. Alternately, the meaning is as follows. You are dear to me, and you have determined that what is going to be stated by me is, quote, firm or dridam, that is, arrived at or affirmed by all valid means of knowing, pramanas. So this is also interesting. He's giving an alternate interpretation where the word dridham is not taken as a modifier of the dearness that Arjuna is to Bhagavan, but rather as a modifier of the knowledge. So this thing that I've taught you, it's firm. In other words, in American slang, like they'll say solid, meaning it's sustained impartial analysis. It has inherent redeeming value. So, and what is it that gives something redeeming value? That it has been, quote, affirmed by all valid means of knowing, or pramanas. In other words, that anyone who impartially looks into this will arrive at this by pratyaksha, anuman, shabda, etc., should they follow the process of doing so. So what is it that makes something firm? It's not simply just a claim. It's not just something that is popular in society, but that it's vetted, that it's met the standard of analysis whereby all means of pramana are used to investigate it, and it's found to be of such nature, then it's acceptable as, quote, firm. So Samipad is saying that Bhagavan's own statement can be taken in that way, that he's assuring Arjuna, this conclusion that I'm telling you, this ultimate knowledge, is firm. So he's not just saying, because I said it, you should do it. He's not just sitting there like an authoritarian, even though he's Bhagavan, even though he could, so to speak. He's not. He's appealing to Arjuna's vivek. He's saying that this meets, impartial analysis by means of all pramanas. Therefore, it's the ultimate knowledge. So that's an interesting alternate interpretation. Thus, I will state that for you. And then he also mentions a variant. Some read dridamati, or a firm resolve, instead of dridam iti. In which case, the meaning of the second half of the verse is as follows: you are dear to me and of firm resolve. Thus I will speak of the highest good for you. So if we take it in a different way, that if the reading is dridamoti instead of dridam iti, then he's praising Arjuna and saying, you are of firm conviction, or you are capable of sustaining a strong resolve. So therefore, I can tell you the ultimate thing that your resolve should be focused on. In other words, people who aren't capable of sustaining, a specific conviction, there's no point in boiling down the essence for them because they're not going to adhere to it anyway. They're bahushaka hyanantascha. They have, innumerable, they're branched out all over the place with so many things. They're not firm or set upon anything, or have the capacity to be such. So, if the reading is dridam moti rather than dridam iti, then the sense comes like that. Okay, so, looks like we're out of time. So, we have plenty more on this verse. We have Chakravarti Pad elaborates on what Swami Pad said, and then Vidyabhushan Pad also has some interesting additional comments. So we'll get to those in the next class. So this is still the introductory verse to 65, which is the actual teaching, which is the thing that the Shraddha is ultimately had in, which is what is to be acquired from the association of sadhus. So in the association of sadhus, one can acquire Shraddha in this most confidential knowledge and path of bhakti. And then what is it, or how is that path of bhakti taught, or rather practiced? That is what is explained in 65. So we'll look at how the commentators have illuminated that essential teaching of the Gita in our next reading, and which is the ultimate object of Shraddha for those who follow this path. So I'll conclude here. If anyone has comments, questions, corrections, or anything otherwise, please feel free to share.
Hare Krishna, Babaji.
Hare Krishna.
Pranam. So, this is about this so valuable Shraddha. Can we say that with the help of the sadhu sangha, the Shraddha may convert in the Bhakti Lata Bij, actually? Is it the Bhakti Lata Bij, this Shraddha?
Some explain it that way. So you could say yes. Some also see the Bhakti Lata Bij as something more than Shraddha, or the desire for following the path of bhakti that emerges on the basis of Shraddha. In other words, to have desire for something, you first of all have a conviction in its existence or in its value. So some interpret the Bhakti Lata Bij to be the what's called bhajana spriha based on a commentary of Chakravarti Pad in the Bhagavatam, to be the desire to follow the path of bhakti that emerges from having had sadhu sangha and the acquisition of Shraddha. And some may interpret the idea of the Bhakti Lata Bij to be Shraddha itself.
So which one, as a sadhaka, we should choose?
It may not be necessary to boil it down specifically. I mean, there's nowhere in the Caritamrta where it's directly equated like this. So some, viewpoints are different. I'll just say plainly, I've heard, Sri Satyanarayan Das Babaji Maharaj explain it as being Shraddha. So that's a viewpoint that y'all are welcome to hold. There are also commentators and others that explain it in another way, and I also see merit to other viewpoints. So according to what one finds most conducive, I don't see that there's a need to to see like a harsh contrast between the viewpoints. It's different ways. It ultimately applies to how literally you want to take the analogy of the creeper and the seed. And, it's an analogy. It's for the purpose of teaching, and the point is to, Rupa Goswami's progression, Shraddha, then, Sadhu Sangha in the form of Guru Sangha, then under the guidance of the Guru doing bhajan. This is the process, so some analogy with seeds and leaves and all this, like, it's just meant to illustrate how to follow this progression. So exactly how we want to, take the analogy and map it onto the system. There's multiple ways it's possible. So I'm not going to say that, one is, necessarily better or the only way to see it. There's multiple ways of seeing it. And if we read, what is Shraddha, what is all this, then that's the point of having heard the analogy in the first place.
Okay, thank you, Babaji.
Yeah, Haribol, Krishna Shanam Baba, thank you so much for this wonderful, enthusiastic class on such wonderful topic. I mean, it really fills my heart with great delight. I mean, thank you so much. Thank you. It's so nice to have your association and to have you. Thank you.
Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe. All right, well, I think that's it then, huh? So we'll conclude for today, and if we're so blessed, then next week we'll get to hear the commentator's illumination of this ultimate teaching of Bhagavad Gita. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai Shri Radhe Shyam. Thank you.